Shots have been fired on the India-China border. Australian journalists are evacuated from China. And Hong Kong refugees are out to sea. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode has been sponsored by Surfshark, because you should be protecting your identity whenever you go online by using a VPN like Surfshark. So, shots have been fired along the India-China border.
India and China are both accusing the other's soldiers of firing shots in a new confrontation along their disputed Himalayan border.
Now, for clarity, no people have been shot. India and China are just accusing each other of firing warning shots to intimidate the other side. But this is the first time in decades shots have been fired here, along the disputed border called the Line of Actual Control. Both India and China had previously agreed not to arm their troops with guns. The point was to prevent escalations. But it seems like at least one side broke that protocol. Which country is it again that has a history of breaking international agreements and taking over disputed territory? But even despite the supposed gun ban, Chinese troops recently have been seen carrying spears and machetes. Maybe they were just cosplaying for the release of the live-action Mulan, which apparently was partially filmed in Xinjiang, known for its gorgeous desert landscapes and efficient ethnic cleansing. More on the Mulan disaster in a future episode. But it's not just India and China relations that are getting worse. It's also, well, it's a lot of places, but I'm going to talk about Australia now.
Two top Australian foreign correspondents were rushed out of China Monday night after what's being described as an extraordinary diplomatic standoff. Australia's ABC broadcaster reported both journalists were separately questioned by Chinese authorities.
That's never a good sign, though the Chinese Communist Party said it was all very legal.
This is a normal law enforcement act. In the law enforcement process of Birtles and Smith, the relevant Chinese authorities act in strict accordance with the law.
Yes, nothing like a midnight visit from Chinese state security to make you feel like the legal system is working. It's not just legal, it's extra legal. The two reporters are Australian Broadcasting Corporation's Bill Birtles and the Australian Financial Review's Michael Smith. Apparently, they were being targeted as persons of interest in an investigation regarding CGTN anchor Cheng Lei, an Australian national who was detained in mid-August, which is why China put an exit ban on both of them so they couldn't leave the country. So, how did they get out? Well, first, the Australian government sheltered the journalists in their embassy and consulate, just to prevent any future midnight visits that could end in their indefinite detention. And then, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade struck an arrangement with China's Ministry of State Security, where the two men would be allowed to leave the country after submitting to questioning by Chinese officials with no Australian officials present. Wow, that sounds great. Hope they still have all their kidneys. Meanwhile, the Australian government is revoking the visas of some Chinese scholars and investigating Chinese media entities in the country. It has to do with this man, Australian politician Shaukat Moslemain. Though Moslemain hasn't been charged with a crime, his home was raided in June during a probe looking for Chinese interference in the Australian government. The Chinese scholars and journalists being investigated were allegedly part of a WeChat group to encourage Mr. Moslemain to advocate for the Chinese government's interests. And now, China is complaining about Australia's horrible attack on freedom of the press and Australia's barbaric search of the homes of Chinese journalists.
The actions of the Australian government seriously interfered with the normal reporting activities of Chinese media in Australia, grossly violated the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese journalists stationed in Australia, and caused serious damage to the physical and mental health of journalists and their families.
Yeah, how dare they? Damaging the physical and mental health of journalists is China's job. And speaking of assaults on the media, China is imposing new visa restrictions targeting U.S. media. The year-long journalist visa has magically become a 2-month visa instead. Chinese authorities have made clear that the temporary press credentials and the visas linked to them can be revoked anytime, leaving affected journalists in a limbo without knowing for sure how long they would be able to remain in China. Like I said, damaging the physical and mental health of journalists, it's China's job. As if U.S. elections weren't enough of a mess as it is. Foreign countries are trying to interfere. And according to National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, China is taking the most active role.
When it comes to elections and what the intelligence community has made very clear is that first you have China, which has the most massive program to influence the United States politically. You have Iran and you have Russia. The scope of Chinese activity against the United States is relentless. We've never seen anything like it. There's nothing like this in the Cold War with the Soviets.
For more on that, check out this recent episode of America Uncovered. And be sure to subscribe while you're over there. The host is fantastic. In a Labor Day speech at the White House, President Trump once again brought up the idea of decoupling with China.
So when you mention the word decouple, it's an interesting word. So we lose billions of dollars, and if we didn't do business with them, we wouldn't lose billions of dollars. It's called decoupling, so you'll start thinking about it.
I'm guessing that China trade deal is not going well, especially after Trump threatened yet another ban on a Chinese company. This time, it's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC. It's China's largest chip manufacturer. That's not what I meant when I said largest chip manufacturer. Not that either. There we go. The threat of U.S. sanctions has wiped out 23% of SMIC's stock value. And that's just based on reports that the U.S. might blacklist it. A Defense Department official said the Trump administration was looking into the possibility. No reason was given, but SMIC's relationship to the Chinese military is under scrutiny. SMIC also makes chips for Chinese telecom Huawei. Huawei has already been hit with crippling U.S. sanctions. But this is just part of the latest U.S. moves to push back against China. The Trump administration is also asking U.S. government agencies to detail all China-related funding. Government agencies are being asked to give extensive details of any funding that seeks to counter China's global influence and business practices or supports Beijing. So far, no action will be taken. The information is just to inform policymakers. But the budget review is just the latest effort that could lead to more actions against China. The newest front in the U.S.-China Cold War? Excel spreadsheets. Speaking of research, the U.S. government has also canceled the visas of 1,000 students that it says have ties to the Chinese military. That's only a fraction of the 370,000 Chinese nationals studying in the U.S. A State Department spokeswoman said the U.S. continued to welcome students and scholars from China who do not further the Chinese Communist Party's goals of military dominance. I'm going to guess that Chinese students don't feel very welcomed at the moment. And bad news for you ketchup fans. 17% of the world's ketchup comes from China's Xinjiang region, known for its plentiful sunshine and abundant concentration camps.
So next time you squeeze that little packet of ketchup onto your greasy French fries, think of Xinjiang.
Genocide fries. But there's some good news for Americans who like their ketchup not from concentration camps. The U.S. is blocking cotton and tomato imports from Xinjiang. Wow. I hope the global supply of ketchup can catch up. But blocking these imports is clearly just another example of how the Trump administration's China bashing is hurting American businesses. I mean, what will Nike do without Uyghur slave labor to make its shoes? As the Nike ad says, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And Nike believes in making money, and it's willing to sacrifice all human decency. Now that's inspiring. And protests in China's Inner Mongolia region are intensifying.
Tens of thousands of ethnic Mongolians have signed a petition in protest against Beijing's new push to promote the country's official language, Mandarin, in Inner Mongolia, a move that some have described as cultural genocide. Last week, widespread anger began brewing in the northern Chinese region of Inner Mongolia after authorities announced they would introduce Mandarin-only teaching to local schools and replace Mongolian language textbooks with standardized Chinese versions for core courses that range from history, politics, to literature.
Have they tried getting the Mongolians to make Nike products? I hear that works really well. Last month, 12 people from Hong Kong attempted to escape by sailing to Taiwan. Yes, Hong Kong is so bad, people there have become Asia's version of Cuban refugees. Well, they were caught off the coast of Guangdong province and sent to mainland China. And Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is now saying they will have to be dealt with by mainland China. So far, they've been denied access to their lawyers. Sounds like they're more out to sea than ever before. And people in Hong Kong are mad at the police again. This time for tackling a 12-year-old girl to the ground. Don't worry, police say they used minimum force to tackle her. The girl's crime? Buying art supplies for school while she was near a protest. You see, last Sunday, Hong Kong was supposed to have their legislative elections. That is, until the Hong Kong government postponed them for a year because of the coronavirus. Yes, it was definitely not because they were worried about losing to pro-democracy parties. So some Hong Kongers came out to protest on what would have been Election Day, and police arrested nearly 300 people. And thanks to the Hong Kong police's intrepid actions, all of the headlines are about how they tackled a 12-year-old girl. And speaking of Hong Kong, this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, especially in Hong Kong, you need to be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect your identity. Everything you do online is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, and in many cases, by the government. And if you're in an authoritarian country like China, this kind of tracking can put you at risk of surveillance and even arrest. So I recommend you use Surfshark to protect yourself online. When you use Surfshark's clean web mode, you'll be protected from trackers plus a lot of ads and malware. With one account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And Surfshark has a special discount for China Uncensored fans. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code UNCENSORED to get our special deal that includes 3 extra months for free. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.